Nobody will admit it officially, but we don't think that, most of us don't think that the Americans would article on Article 5 in our case. At the moment, the Trump administration just wouldn't honor it. That's what we actually think. So it's actually quite conditional for us. But for Ukraine, an Article 5 guarantee that was only written down on paper would be lacking in any credibility. It has to be based on physical military force, which is in the country to be defended.
So you're not even confident enough that US would join the fight in case of Russia's attack on NATO?
Well, in theory, it would. And in the past, it always would. I mean, in any other American administration, we knew that they would be there. But the Trump administration so far has so departed from the previous basis of American security thinking that the honest view now is that the answer is, would they or would they not? Well, it would depend. It would be conditional. It would depend on the nature of the crisis. But we cannot take it for granted. The idea that we always used to be able to take for granted is an attack on one is an attack on all, and we will all contribute to defending each other from any attack, even in one part of the continent. But now the honest understanding of Article 5 is that depending on how it might arise will depend on whether America would really respond. And there is a skepticism that Article 5 in NATO has become conditional instead of unconditional.
So from your perspective, Ukraine should not trust President Trump's words and promises on this Article 5-like guarantee?
Well, if I were in Kiev, I would not believe it. And if, for political reasons, I could imagine that President Zelenskyy might feel he has to go along with it. I can imagine that politicians, have to sign up to things that they may not entirely believe in. But if I was a planner in Kiev and I only had an Article 5 on paper, I would not assume that it will work in practice.
There have been lots of discussions and meetings in Berlin between US administration officials, European allies and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. What did we get from this big diplomatic process in Berlin? Because they have probably negotiated a sort of European security forces or guarantees in Ukraine and US commitment to provide at least intel support.
Well, I think the Berlin was useful because it provided two or three things. One is it gained time for both Ukraine and for the Europeans, because originally this plan was going to be a take it or leave it plan by the time of Thanksgiving in the United States at the end of November. So the important point was, first of all, to gain time so that the thing could be looked at a bit more carefully. Then secondly, the Berlin meeting was able to come back with other ideas, because what the Europeans, and I'm including Ukraine and President Zelenskyy when I say the Europeans, when the Europeans need to show the United States that they're not standing back from the process. They don't want to be faced with a take it or leave it option. They want to say, look, if this is the outline, the Steve Witkoff outline, here is our version of what might be better to create a settlement. Here is a version we could just about live with. And we know that the 28-point Steve Witkoff plan then became a 19-point plan with lots of square brackets. And square brackets in a document are always the bits where diplomats say, we can't agree on this until the leaders agree. So we leave those difficult parts in square brackets, and here are all the other things we can agree on. And so the second thing that the Berlin meeting achieved was to create another version of the plan, which at least is the version which is more or less now being put to Russia this weekend as we speak. So they gained that. And the third thing they gained was, I think, a sense that the military planning for some sort of reassurance force, some sort of coalition of the willing, it's now going to be called Multinational Force Ukraine. That's the official terminology now in Britain, Multinational Force brackets Ukraine. And that planning for that has gone ahead, but we still don't know what the mission might be. But nevertheless, there is a sense that if there is some sort of agreement, that there will have to be some sort of backup force, or a force which can either reassure or monitor or do something else. And at least we're a bit further forward with that. But I have to say, my own view is that all of this will fail But until it fails, we have to assume that we can do our best to help it to succeed. So I think what the Europeans were doing was saying, look, we will help as much as we possibly can to maintain a just and lasting peace. So a peace that is not one-sided, it's just, and it's lasting in the sense that it's not going to fall over or or collapse in months or 1 year or 2 years. It might last a bit longer than that. So it's just and lasting peace. And these are our proposals to do that. And we will give all of our strength to trying to make that work, even though in reality, we think it probably won't work. And in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we'll be back where we were before this original proposal, the Witkoff proposal, emerged from the secret meetings he was having with Dmitriev in Miami.
Let's also cover the situation on the ground. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin today said that Kupiansk had gone under Russian control several weeks ago. Meanwhile, the statement was made following Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's surprise visit to the city of Kupiansk. What is your take on the situation in Kupiansk and overall on the ground in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, Kupiansk is under pressure in the same way that Pokrovsk was under great pressure. But just as the Russians have not finally taken Pokrovsk, they've got most of it, but not all of it. They have certainly made progress at Kupiansk. But Putin said 3 times that Pokrovsk had been captured when it hadn't. He now says that Kupiansk has been captured when it hasn't. And the fact that President Zelenskyy went to Kupiansk was indicative. He wanted to show that it was still in Ukrainian hands. Undoubtedly, it is under pressure, and there is a danger that Kupiansk may be lost, but it hasn't happened yet. That's certainly my understanding. And there's no reason why Kupiansk will be captured if Ukraine is able to gain more weapons and actually draft in more military units to defend it. They've been fighting fairly hard there. And Kupiansk matters because we're talking here about the Russians moving back into Kharkiv, which is not one of the oblasts that they now claim are Russian territories. So this again is Russia, as in Dnipropetrovsk. This is the Russians moving into other oblasts that they don't claim, simply to conquer as much territory as possible. And as President Putin said at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, wherever the Russian soldier treads is Russian territory. That's what he said, that's what he means. And he spoke even 24 hours ago, saying that Russia will liberate its historic lands, whatever they are. The historic lands are whatever, in his twisted view of history, he thinks belongs somehow to Russia.
Let's also cover most recent Ukrainian attack. Underwater drones hit the Russian Kilo-class submarine in Novorossiysk, a key Russian naval base on the Black Sea. There have been lots of discussions about the direct damage from this attack, but Russians sunk several barges at the entrance of this naval port to prevent another drones just to enter this base. How can you assess this defense tactic to just sink some barges inside your port?
Well, that's what countries do. I mean, it's quite an effective way of keeping ships out. You've got to also be able to bring to actually open up the curtain, as it were. If you've sunk ships as a barrier, you've got to be able to open it up to let your own ships in and out at some point. But this was the first, actually, in maritime warfare, because this is the first example of a drone submarine at such a range actually conducting a successful mission. Now, we don't know how much damage it did, but when the Sea Babies attacked the Rostov-on-Don in 2023, they damaged it. And then there was another attack in 2024, which effectively sank it. So we know that 1 Kilo-class submarine has already gone to the Sea Baby drones. And this is the first submarine Sea Baby, which has clearly damaged one of the Kilo-class submarines. I don't at this moment know which one it is. The Krasnodar, I think, is one of them, and the Novgorod is another one that they've got in Novorossiysk. It might have been one of those two, but I think there's a third one as well. And there's a couple of their Kilo-class submarines that were part of the Black Sea Fleet that left the Black Sea in 2022 when it went to the Mediterranean and now can't get back. So essentially, Ukraine has damaged or destroyed at least 2 out of 4 of the submarines that the Russians keep. And the fact that they've done it in Novorossiysk, which is on the eastern shore of the Black Sea, inside Russian territory, is very impressive. It's a small but significant military victory for Ukrainian technology, and again, it shows the world that Ukraine can continue to find ways to try to defend itself. And this is not just a question of hitting a submarine, but these submarines, these Kilo-class submarines, were launching Caliber missiles, the cruise missiles, which are some of the missiles that have been doing so much damage to civilians and civilian infrastructure inside Ukraine. So by hitting one of the submarines, the Ukrainians aren't just hitting a valuable warship of the Russian Navy, they're also taking out one of the ships that is launching missiles at Ukraine on a regular basis.